My setup has changed yet again because I've added bookshelves. Even though it feels like yesterday that I've only just sorted my rainbow shelves out, I've officially undone them. And this time I have my battery charged and ready to go. No more battery dying. Oh, that's just tempting fate. So I just finished the third book in this series. I just wanted to talk about Alice in Wonderland for a bit. I am not dressed like Alice, like normal YouTubers when trying to talk about this kind of thing does, but I'm going to say my dragons count. It has been a little while since I've read Alice in Wonderland. I had a little book that contained both the stories of Wonderland and Looking Glass, and I hated it. I think it was just my dyslexia, just not liking how it's being told, because it was very dreamlike and very scrambled, and it was just a pain. But at the same time, I could appreciate the whimsy and the fact that there was not that many children's stories back then. So I get its popularity, and I love all of everything that came from it, but not the source material. I read that in preparation for getting the references in Christina Henry's Alice series. I have read her Mermaid book before. That was my first introduction to Christina Henry. And basically, it's a retelling, but told very loosely and very dark and twisted. On to Alice. It doesn't matter if you've never read the source material, you know Alice in Wonderland, you probably really love Alice in Wonderland. It's become such a cultural reference at this point. And so if you go into Christina Henry's Alice, you should probably be very aware of the trigger warnings right up front. There is SA and discussions of and surviving SA. It's not on screen, but there is flashbacks to the SA. So the setup in this book, in this world, is there's a new city and an old city. The old city is surrounded by the new city. The new city is the upper class elite rich. There's a strong gust of wind. Don't know if you heard that, but I don't want to shut the door. It's summer. I'm keeping the doors and windows open. You're going to hear the trees. So Alice resides in the new city. She is one of the spoilt rich kids and does not know how the world works, basically. And she's just not happy. She's bored. She wants to go on adventures. So her friend takes her to the old city. And the story picks up of her going into a cafe and the story picks up with them going into a cafe and Alice coming out alone and very bloody. There's a scar across her cheek and she's put in a hospital because her mother does not want to deal with that aftermath. Unfortunately, it's brought up a lot as part of Alice's healing journey that she's just forgotten about because she doesn't even get visitors in this hospital, and they drug her food every day, so she's literally living in this haze up until the escape, because right next door to her cell is Hatcher, which is this universe's Mad Hatter, but he's Hatcher because he likes axes, naturally. Apparently the Jabberwocky is also released in this hospital escape. The hospital burns down and they head off and they find all of the crime bosses, which are the references to Alice in Wonderland. So the big boss is the rabbit. Although when we get there, we realise what exactly happened when Alice was in the old city the first time. But following them through this whole, going through the old city, trying to defeat the big bad, which is just following them about a bit, is the Jabberwocky, which, another world building thing I should probably have mentioned is that magicians exist and they are outlawed. And in ancient times there was two, one very big bad and one good. Big bad was the Jabberwocky, who is immortal. That's literally the conflict that we go through. So this is very dark, very twisted, and very bloody story of going through the old city and dealing with the Jabberwocky and the crime bosses. And there's even more twistedness dealing with the Walrus, because apparently he's trying to become a magician, and the way to become a magician is to, well, his way of doing it is to consume the magicians that he is trying to. The worst part is he doesn't know who's the magician, so he's so very big trigger warning, because he doesn't care about age. Yeah. So there is a very dark twist to these stories, and you just don't want the details, and thankfully Henry does not give them to you. Kind of. It's discussed and heavily implied across the story. So if this doesn't deter you somehow, because it is very I was compelled by the story, just because you are getting a story of a survivor who is coming to terms with her own power and coming out of some bad places, because and trying to overcome from the haze that was the food, well, the drugged food in the hospital, and she's coming out of that. And so she goes from this very weak, dreamlike state, because she's literally coming out of the after effects of the drug. So at the very beginning, she is very dependent on Hatcher, who is pulling her along and saving her up until she's finally clear of the drug and trying to find her own agency and her own power. Because very early on we do get hints that she is magical herself. So that is basically this whole series, is her trying to figure that out. Well, not figure out that she is magical, but because she's trying to figure out how to use it better. I'm just gonna say, this can be a standalone. Alice, the first book, is open-ended, but it's also, you can stop there and not care about the rest of it. And I would not advocate for either, because I don't know, I think it's like a tonal shift, but there's still like the horror elements amongst it, because the Jabberwocky brought the horror in Alice because of they see, well, the aftermath of what he touches, and then in this one the horror element stays put, but it's not as dark. It's still fairy tale dark, but not this dark. So moving on to Red Queen, the sequel, they've basically just left the old and new city. They're now trying to find, well, they're trying to find Hatcher's daughter. So they just journey, they struggle, and they come across a forest, and in this forest, this is where the horror element comes back, because Alice gets separated from Hatcher, and there's giants. I think Red Queen is wrongly named because there is very little of the Red Queen. There is the big focus of the White Queen because she's the big bad of this story. Yeah, we get out of the forest to the town where the Red Queen is decided that the town is going to offer up a child every now and again. I can't remember how often. It's been a bit. I can't remember when I read these two, so it's been a minute. But Alice is in this town alone, and she's decided to help them and bring the kids back if she can. That is the story, but it takes a little while to get there. This is actually very slowly paced, and I think that is what's leading into the horror element with the giants. It's like very eerie, but there's something off in this story. That's what I kept feeling like, is that there's something off, and I still can't put my finger on it. It's very difficult to describe, and I don't think I have the mental capacity right now. I don't think I've got the brain power at the minute because I've been overworked. We get the Red Queen at the end, so that's why I think this is wrongly named. And then at the very end, the big twist doesn't make much sense because the White Queen is taking children to steal their essence to make herself young, or keep herself young. The issue I have with that is a spoiler, but I will say the timeline doesn't seem to make much sense unless I've missed something. Unless it wasn't to keep herself young but to steal their essence to make her more powerful. I have no idea. It's been a bit of a minute since I've read the book, but in Looking Glass, which is kind of what I have the most to say because I've just finished it, we follow Alice's sister in the new city, or Alice's replacement. She's, I think, 9 or 12. I think 9. Can't be bothered to look that up again, but she is just as spoilt and naive of how things work, but she is very, very aware of her magic. And I was wanting to get some more from the new city because through, what's her name? I've even forgotten her name. Elizabeth. So in the first short story, because this is a short story and there's like 4 of them. So in the short story, we follow Elizabeth and it's Giving Day. So we finally get the day that Alice keeps referencing throughout the series. And it's just discussing the new city through Elizabeth's lens as this 9-year-old not understanding, and her family has let slip that there is an Alice, but it's not mentioned, not explained. She doesn't know she's got this sister, and it brings up a little tension amongst the family when it lets slip, especially when on Giving Day she decides to wear the exact same thing that Alice used to wear, the blue and the white, and even the butler slips up and calls her Alice accidentally, and that becomes a thing. And then there's Giving Day. She decides to stain the stone marble floor that apparently needs to be very pristine, and there's like this commentary on the elitist people of this one little plaza area. It's this very, very pristine marble, and nobody normally walks on it, and they walk on it on this one day of the year, on Giving Day. and they can barely walk on it. They've got to shuffle because it's just so slippy, because it's polished every freaking day. And she decides she's going to put the colour from her shoe into the marble. She starts cursing some of the people in charge of the new city, which is quite funny. But at the same time, you're just like, I really want to see the outcome of the downfall of the new city. I want to see the city burn. And it kind of felt like that was what it was going to be. But it isn't. It ended up with her being, her seeing this chicken man and wanting to see his face, because it'd be funny to laugh at a chicken face. Because again, she's spoilt and bratty, but at the same time, you kind of clap at her cleverness for not liking the people in charge and making like this certain curses that she puts on them. The chicken man runs down this alley, and she goes following, and somehow ends up in the old city because magic. She now has to escape the old city as a 9-year-old, and from what we've learnt of the old city in the first book, it's not a good place for a girl to be. And so she's literally hiding from people, rightly so, because everybody's apparently violent to the new city people. The second story kind of feels a little redundant, but at the same time, you kind of need to get from point A to B. And it's she doesn't know who Elizabeth is. She's just a girl in a dream. So that's a thing. And on top of that, we've got the weirdest little side tangent of a conflict. Again, Hatcher goes off in search of a village because all of a sudden the trek through the forest trying to find their forever home is... They come across a blizzard, so Hatcher has to go away to see if he can like find a village, or if they have to like hunker down for a bit. She just comes across a house, enters said house, there's a boy laughing. But yeah, story 2, pointless house, pointless thing. But I will say this: the scary creature is scary. I might just not be good with horror, but I don't care. At the end, they come across a little cottage, and this is where I feel like there's a story missing, because this whole thing, this whole adventure, this whole of Alice's story arc started with her assault. Because it's repeated again over and over that she could never experience, she could never let Hatcher close. She, even in the second story, when she catches him staring at her, she feels guilty that she will never feel ready for him. And suddenly, after the end of this one, and 2 stories later, one of which wasn't even to do with them, it felt a little abrupt that they're in bed together. But it's just like a page where Hatcher's woken up, and then it goes into his backstory with Hattie and his before he ended up in the Rabbit's employ with this guy called Dagger Dan and his little fight club. It was an interesting backstory. I did want to have a bit more with the fight club storyline. It was the longest story. However, we get told about Dagger Dan and why people respect him and why nobody crosses him, but we don't actually see him beat people up. We don't actually see him in action. So I kind of wanted more from Dagger Dan, but we did get a bit more from the old city. I really want to see the downfall of these places. I want to see the downfall of how corrupt these places can be, because we get it hinted at in the first story, and it's just I just want to see it burn, I guess. What does that make of me? Even though the story is very long, I feel like we should have had a story in between 2 and 3 where we actually spend time at Olivia's cottage during that winter. Because at the end of the second story, they're just arriving, and then we get Hatch's backstory, and then at the end of the beginning of the fourth one, they're leaving Olivia's cottage, and there's quite a lovely little description that I wanted to be a bit more drawn out. I wanted to have a nice cozy time at this cottage, but no, this is a dark twisted story, so we're not going to dwell on that. I say dark and twisted, but this just feels not dark and twisted compared to the other two. It's like it got lighter. It's like this is the pinnacle of evil, and then this is diet pinnacle of evil, and then I don't even know what this is trying to be, like filler with a sprinkling of evil. But I just wanted some time at this cottage where Olivia will help Alice complete her healing from what happened in the beginning. And then the opening of the third story wouldn't feel so out of character. Like this whole journey was skipped, I think, because there's a lot of emotional baggage there. She could have needed that time, that story. Oh yeah, we'll always be together, but we're not actually going to hold hands or show anything else. And then all of a sudden they're in bed together. I don't get it. There's a story missing. And it would have been nice if we actually got that lovely little winter in the cottage where Alice is learning her power a bit better from Olivia, who is a seasoned witch. I'm just going to talk about the fourth one. Alice is pregnant, and then there's a little discussion on motherhood. There's this giant build up to the village of Pure, and it's basically a town that is a little tyrannical. They literally do the burn the witch thing, but instead of burning, it's a chair where they have a pole in the sky and they let it get hit by lightning. This is where my ultimate nitpick, well, my ultimate criticism of this series is it literally builds to such a tiny town in the mountains of tyrannical people who is like, burn the witch. There is such a build up to it in the beginning of this story, and they're there for a few pages. They are there for only a few pages. It's like they get there, there's people following them now, there's people watching them, then this, careful of this place, there's going to be something bad happening at this place. Alice is having nightmares about this place. They meet the main person in charge, who was the person bringing the lightning, because she's a magician. They be violent, they leave. 2 to 3 pages. It felt like I was flung through this village. And then we have a talk about motherhood, and then it ends. I will definitely say you can stop here. Just, if you've got the stomach for it, yeah, you can stop at book 1, because I feel like the quality just goes down a bit as you progress. It's my rant. I kind of really enjoyed the first one because it was about a survivor coming into their own and finding out what happened to her and overcoming it. That was pretty good. I liked that. I don't know what happened after. Could have just stopped right there. Could have just not mentioned Hatcher's daughter was a thing and just ended it. And then we didn't need like a continuation. You could have like had the Red Queen be its own separate thing. That's my experience with this series. I don't know how to conclude my thoughts on this series. I would love to read another Alice in Wonderland story. My thoughts on this series is that it had a solid beginning and then it didn't feel satisfying after, if that makes sense. It felt off after that. Trying to be a bit more comprehensive, but I this is my first review, so maybe I'll get better as I talk about more books. So yeah, that's my thoughts on this series as a whole, and my thoughts on the original Alice in Wonderland story. Well, I seem to really like the concept of Alice in Wonderland. I'm not having a good time reading stories on Alice in Wonderland. If there are any recommendations, do comment, because I am very well aware that people saw my last video now. Very scary. So if you are familiar with some good Alice in Wonderland stories to read, do share them. I kind of need help. Again, I need an outro. I still don't have one, so bye.